Patti LaBelle reveals 6 lesbian singers she secretly dated who betrayed her. What if one of the most powerful voices in music history carried 6 untold love stories, each ending in heartbreak, silence, or death? For decades, Patti LaBelle has been praised as the godmother of soul. But behind the dazzling gowns and thunderous applause lies a secret symphony of forbidden passion. Tonight, we pull back the velvet curtain to uncover the emotions she never sang aloud, connections that rewrote her legacy in whispers, not notes. Stay tuned, because what you're about to hear will change how you see one of music's most sacred icons. Welcome to Legends of Black Excellence, the rise of a diva and the secret she carried. There are singers, and then there is Patti LaBelle, the woman whose voice could split the air like thunder and soothe a heart in the same breath. Long before she became a household name, she was Patricia Holt from Philadelphia, a shy church girl with a power too vast to hide. In the early 1960s, she stepped onto the stage with an energy that refused containment, transforming every lyric into confession and prayer. Critics wrote that when Patti sang, even skeptics felt the tremor of belief. She didn't just perform music, she inhabited it. Each note seemed to come from somewhere older and deeper than fame itself. By the time America crowned her the godmother of soul, her name had become synonymous with strength, grace, and the electricity of emotion. Before stadium lights and presidential audiences, there was a small vocal group called the Bluebells. Alongside Sarah, Nona Hendricks, and Cindy Birdsong, Patti forged a sound that defined an era gospel roots laced with rhythm and blues sophistication. Together, they crafted harmonies that could lift ceilings in Harlem nightclubs and fill churches with awe. Sarah's crystalline soprano blended with Patti's hurricane vibrato, while Nona's experimental instincts pushed them toward the future of funk and rock. Their chemistry was undeniable, 4 women sharing cramped tour buses, cheap motels, and the dream of breaking barriers in a male-dominated industry. When they later re-emerged as LaBelle in the 1970s, clad in silver bodysuits and cosmic energy, they became symbols of black female liberation. Lady Marmalade, released in 1974, sold more than 1 million copies and shot to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, the first time an all-black female group had done so in that decade. Yet success for Patti always carried solitude in its shadow. Interviews hinted that behind her radiant confidence lived a woman guarding stories too intimate for microphones. Colleagues remembered how she could move from laughter to tears within a single rehearsal, as if each melody reopened an invisible wound. Those who toured with her spoke of late-night writing sessions, journals filled with half-finished verses, and a longing for connection, rarely satisfied by applause. The opening of the video captures this duality, the contrast between the celebrated icon and the private individual haunted by unspoken love. It suggests that behind every high note lies a confession never made public, a truth locked within decades of discipline and decorum. The documentary's narration doesn't accuse, it wonders. It frames Patti's legend not as scandal, but as mystery, the question of what it costs to be both adored and misunderstood. In passing, it references Sarah and Nona Hendricks, reminding viewers that every great career is built upon relationships as complex as the harmonies that sustain it. It evokes the hidden tenderness among artists who lived under social constraints that forbade them to express love freely. Whether the 6 rumored romances were real or metaphorical, the point is not revelation, but empathy. How secrecy can shape a voice, how longing can fuel artistry. The segment positions Patti's story within a larger history of women in music who carried private battles behind dazzling lights. By the time the introduction closes, the audience feels the tension between admiration and curiosity. Patti LaBelle stands at the center, not accused, not glorified, but humanized. Her journey from church choirs to Carnegie Hall becomes the emotional foundation for the tales that follow. The narrator promises 6 chapters of hidden affection, 6 names once whispered in dressing rooms and now echoed in rumor. Whether truth or allegory, the story invites reflection on love identity and the price of silence in a world quick to judge. As the screen fades, one message lingers. Sometimes the loudest song is the one a legend never dares to sing. Sarah Dash, 3 years in one bed and a silent death. In the mid-1960s, when American soul music was finding its golden rhythm, the Bluebells were climbing their way into fame. At the heart of the group stood Patti LaBelle, fierce, brilliant, and tireless, and beside her was Sarah Dash, a woman whose presence carried warmth and quiet devotion. Between 1965 and 1968, their companionship deepened beyond the simplicity of friendship. They shared stages, laughter, sleepless bus rides, and endless hotel rooms as their group traveled across the United States. Those who worked close to them recalled how inseparable they were, finishing each other's sentences, trading melodies in rehearsal, and even choosing to room together when every other member requested privacy. Assistants remembered late nights when their door stayed closed for hours, light seeping through the crack beneath the sound of muffled conversation and sudden laughter drifting into the hallway. To outsiders, their closeness was innocent, the natural intimacy of two women surviving a harsh industry together. But within the touring circle, whispers began to stir. A photographer from that period mentioned that Sarah's gaze lingered on Patti longer than the camera's flash could capture. A makeup artist described moments of tenderness, a hand brushing away tears, a shared scarf, a comforting embrace that lasted a little too long. Though none of this proved anything beyond affection, the 1960s were not a forgiving decade. Rumors spread quickly through backstage corridors, amplified by journalists hungry for scandal. Their managers dismissed the talk, reminding everyone that image mattered more than truth. Yet behind the perfect harmonies, something deeper pulsed, a bond that both women seemed determined to protect from a world unwilling to understand it. When Sarah decided to leave the group in 1971, she gave no warning, no explanation. The departure shattered Patti's composure. A nurse who worked with her at the time recalled the star's exhaustion, sleepless nights, loss of appetite, and sudden collapse during rehearsal. For 11 weeks, Patti withdrew from public life, canceling shows and isolating herself in silence. Newspapers cited vocal strain, calling it laryngitis, but insiders knew she simply stopped speaking altogether. Photographs of Sarah disappeared from her dressing room walls. Shared gifts, once displayed with pride, were packed into boxes and stored away. Her longtime assistant once revealed that Patti burned a letter believed to be from Sarah just before recording resumed, as if trying to erase the ghost of what was lost. Years passed and time softened the sharp edges of memory, but it never healed them completely. When LaBelle reunited briefly in 1991, Sarah returned to perform at the Apollo Theater. The atmosphere was electric, 3 legends sharing a stage after decades apart. Yet something unspoken hung between them. Throughout the performance, Patti and Sarah never exchanged a glance. Crew members backstage noted the tension, the air thick with the weight of unspoken words. After the show, Patti reportedly smashed a mirror in her dressing room, a private storm no one dared to interrupt. Their paths crossed only once more in public 30 years later when Sarah appeared unexpectedly at Patti's concert in Atlantic City. She sang just a few bars, smiled faintly, and slipped away into the wings. 2 days later, on September 20th, 2021, Sarah Dash passed away in her Trenton home. The news stunned fans and colleagues alike. Sarah had been 76, still active in community work and music advocacy. Her death, ruled as heart failure, left behind little more than a handful of belongings, among them a framed photo of her and Patti from 1966, marked on the back with the word Detroit in fading red ink. Patti made no public statement, canceled her upcoming show, and avoided interviews. A member of her team confirmed that she sealed her private studio indefinitely. For someone who had turned every heartbreak into song, this silence spoke volumes. It was as though grief had stolen the one thing she had always relied on: her voice. To this day, the full nature of Patti LaBelle and Sarah Dash's relationship remains a mystery. What endures is not scandal, but tenderness. 2 artists bound by love, loyalty, and loss during a time when such emotions had to be hidden behind applause. Sarah's death closed a chapter written in whispers and melody, one that Patti has never reopened. And yet, in every performance, in every note that trembles with sorrow and strength, one can still hear the echo of that friendship, a quiet harmony that refuses to fade. Tina Turner, the cinnamon perfume and the night Ike, lost his mind. In the spring of 1976, San Francisco glimmered with the heat of music and rebellion. Two queens of the stage, Patti LaBelle and Tina Turner, were set to perform at a charity gala inside the Grand Civic Center. Both women were powerhouses, commanding audiences with energy that defied the limits of the human voice. Patti had just emerged from a turbulent breakup while Tina was trapped in a crumbling marriage with Ike Turner. Backstage, amid the chaos of flashing cameras and glittering gowns, something unspoken seemed to pass between them, a spark of recognition between two souls who understood both triumph and torment. Witnesses later described how they laughed together after the show, lingering long after the crowd had gone, their conversation soft and close. That night would later become the subject of endless whispers, the night Patti left Tina's suite at dawn, barefoot heels in hand, her lipstick faintly smudged. At the Fairmont Hotel, a doorman remembered seeing Patti exit the elevator around 4 a.m. Her blouse collar slightly askew, the faint scent of cinnamon trailing behind her. It was Tina's signature fragrance, a warm, spiced perfume she wore after every show. A housekeeper who entered the room hours later told co-workers that the air still held that same lingering sweetness, a scent that seemed almost mournful. Officially, the two had simply shared a late-night talk about music and sisterhood. Yet among hotel staff, the story grew its own rhythm. Some swore they had heard laughter echo through the suite. Others whispered of tears. Whether true or exaggerated, that night forged a connection the public never saw, a moment of tenderness between two women, burdened by the expectations of fame and the cruelty of the men around them. By morning, the fragile peace had shattered. Ike Turner arrived at the front desk furious and trembling, demanding that the hotel change rooms immediately. A security guard later claimed he shot a piercing look at Patti as she crossed the lobby, an expression filled with suspicion and wounded pride. Within hours, his rage boiled over. What followed was yet another violent confrontation that pushed Tina closer to leaving her abusive husband for good. Those who knew her said that night changed something inside her. For once, she had felt seen not as a performer or victim, but as a woman deserving of gentleness. Patti, meanwhile, returned to her tour schedule, carrying the memory like a secret wound she would never discuss. To those around her, she seemed distracted, avoiding certain perfumes, certain melodies, and above all, the mention of Tina's name. Months later, while testing a new fragrance during a photo shoot, a stylist brushed Patti's wrist with a cinnamon-based scent. Instantly, she recoiled, washing her skin 3 times until the aroma was gone. From that day forward, she forbade anyone from bringing that fragrance near her dressing room. The once beloved spice that evoked warmth and celebration had turned into a haunting reminder of a night she could neither erase nor relive. Between 1977 and 1985, the two singers never shared a stage, never attended the same award shows, and avoided joint interviews. When their names appeared together in press schedules, one would quietly withdraw. Fans speculated about rivalry, but those close to Patti knew it was pain, not pride, that kept her silent. During a performance in Chicago in 1985, while singing "If Only You Knew," she abruptly stopped mid-song, covered her face, and broke into tears. The audience applauded, thinking it was part of the act, but her band knew better. She left the stage without finishing, whispering only, "Turn off the lights." Decades passed. Tina rebuilt her life, finding peace in Switzerland and marrying again, while Patti continued to reign as a matriarch of soul, her influence spanning generations. Still, neither woman ever spoke publicly about that night in San Francisco. When Tina Turner passed away in 2023, Patti was seen attending a quiet church service in Philadelphia, her head bowed, dressed entirely in white. No statement, no tribute, only silence. Yet those who knew her best said she carried a trace of cinnamon in her handbag, sealed in an old perfume vial she could never throw away. Perhaps it was memory, perhaps forgiveness. Whatever it was, it remained a symbol of a moment suspended between love and loss, the night two legends crossed paths, leaving behind the faintest scent of something beautiful and forbidden. Gladys Knight, the thigh touch photo, and the silent disappearance. In the early 1980s, two of soul music's greatest voices found comfort in each other's company. Patti LaBelle had begun rebuilding her career after years of personal struggle, while Gladys Knight was emerging from a difficult period marked by addiction and financial loss. Their paths crossed during a concert series in Atlanta in 1982. After one performance, when the lights dimmed and the crowd faded away, the two women remained seated on the backstage stairs, heads leaning together, whispering prayers for strength. A janitor who worked late that night would later recall the sight: two stars stripped of glamour, joined by faith and exhaustion, their microphones still hanging around their necks like crosses. From that moment, their friendship blossomed into something deeper: quiet understanding, mutual admiration, and the rare kind of closeness born of shared survival. Over the next few weeks, Patti and Gladys were often seen together after shows. They spoke in hushed tones, traded Bible verses, and exchanged handwritten notes of encouragement. Crew members described how they would hold hands and pray before stepping onto the stage, their voices trembling as they recited Corinthians. Love is patient. Love is kind. The connection between them was undeniable, though neither woman ever acknowledged it publicly. Their bond seemed to exist in a space untouched by fame, a place where vulnerability could finally breathe. But even in that privacy, the music industry watched. Managers, assistants, and journalists had grown attuned to every gesture, every rumor. It was only a matter of time before an image surfaced that would alter everything. One evening after a show in Philadelphia, an anonymous envelope arrived at Patti's label office. Inside was a grainy photograph of the two women sitting close together in a dressing room. Gladys's hand rested on Patti's thigh, and the caption scrawled on a note read, "I think the public would be interested in this." The threat was clear. Within days, both artists were called into separate meetings with their management teams. They were told to distance themselves immediately, to avoid interviews that could confuse the fans, and to stop appearing in each other's company. For women who had built careers on integrity and emotion, the warning was devastating. Patti reacted with anger, pacing her rehearsal space, refusing to sing for days. Gladys, overwhelmed by fear of judgment, withdrew completely, turning back to church as her refuge. A backstage assistant remembered the day it ended. Patti called Gladys's hotel room in Baltimore. Before a joint show, no one answered. Hours later, news came that Gladys had quietly returned to Atlanta, leaving behind an unsigned note that simply said, "Pray for me." The next time the two appeared at the same event, they avoided eye contact entirely. People close to them said it was as though an invisible wall had been built overnight. Gladys began attending daily services at her local Baptist congregation, pouring herself into gospel projects, while Patti focused on touring, masking heartbreak with endless work. Neither mentioned the other in interviews. When asked about faith, Patti would smile sadly and say, "It keeps me from falling apart." Behind that smile, insiders believed, was the memory of a friendship sacrificed to protect careers in a world that demanded perfection. Years later, when retrospectives celebrated their legacies, that photograph had long vanished, but the silence surrounding it endured. Gladys never spoke of the incident again, dedicating her life to ministry and music that uplifted others. Patti, too, moved forward, though those who worked for her said she sometimes requested dimmed lights before certain songs, as if performing in remembrance of something lost. The story of the thigh touch photo became a ghost tale within the industry, proof of how quickly affection could be turned into ammunition. What remained unspoken between Patti LaBelle and Gladys Knight was not scandal but sorrow, the cost of tenderness in a time when love of any kind beyond the expected could not survive the glare of the spotlight. Their voices still echo with that truth, strong, pure, and touched by a silence that has never truly faded. Phyllis Hyman, Lipstick on the Pillow and the Locked Purple Notebook. In 1987, two extraordinary women met in a New York recording studio for a charity project promoting AIDS awareness. Patti LaBelle, already a powerhouse of emotion and soul, was invited to lend her voice alongside Phyllis Hyman, a statuesque jazz vocalist whose elegance masked a fragile heart. Their first encounter was quiet, a shared glance across the soundboard, the hum of microphones, and a lingering note that seemed to draw them together. Technicians who worked that evening recalled how, after the session ended, Patti stayed behind to help Phyllis remove her headphones. A red lipstick mark was left on a silk handkerchief, and Patti slipped it into her purse as though it were something sacred. From that night forward, an unspoken understanding grew between them, not loud or scandalous, but gentle, private, and profoundly human. They began meeting away from the stage lights, often at small cafes or late-night jazz clubs. A restaurant server from Cleopatra's Needle remembered the pair sitting in a back corner booth, sharing dessert and tea, their laughter soft and musical. Phyllis, who had long battled isolation in the industry, found solace in Patti's warmth. Patti, in turn, saw in Phyllis a mirror of her own vulnerability, the loneliness that fame could not cure. Their connection remained invisible to the outside world. There were no photographs, no headlines, only brief encounters that left deep impressions. A personal assistant once said Patti would rearrange her tour schedule just to coincide with Phyllis's New York shows, claiming it was for inspiration. What no one realized was that behind that devotion lay something far more intimate, a companionship built on shared exhaustion and mutual understanding. By the early 1990s, however, the shadows around Phyllis began to thicken. Years of industry rejection and personal disappointment had driven her into bouts of depression. Managers worried about her declining health, and studio technicians often found her sitting alone after rehearsals, staring at sheet music with unfocused eyes. Patti tried to stay close, calling her often and sending notes of encouragement, but the pressures of the business and their need for secrecy made it difficult. In 1992, during a performance at the Apollo Theater, Phyllis caught sight of Patti in the front row. In that instant, she stopped singing, lowered the microphone, and quietly left the stage. Witnesses said she appeared pale and shaken. Backstage, she collapsed into Patti's arms and wept until she was too weak to stand. The show was canceled, and rumors swirled about illness, exhaustion, or heartbreak. None of them came close to the truth. As Phyllis's condition worsened, industry executives began to intervene. Patti's management advised her to create distance to protect her reputation, fearing that the media would misinterpret their closeness. For a woman whose entire career was built on authenticity, this demand was devastating. Phyllis felt abandoned and spiraled further into despair. The last time they saw each other was in April 1995 at an Italian restaurant in Midtown Manhattan. Patti arrived, first ordered 2 glasses of champagne, and waited for nearly an hour. When Phyllis finally appeared, she was quiet but radiant. They spoke little. According to a waiter who served them that night, Patti reached across the table to hold her hand, a gesture of farewell neither woman would name. 2 months later, on June 30th, Phyllis Hyman was found lifeless in her apartment, a glass of champagne still on the nightstand, and traces of red lipstick on her pillow. In the aftermath, a single velvet-bound journal was discovered among her belongings, a small purple notebook locked with no key. Friends said it contained pages of memories, dates, and reflections from her most private moments. Some believed it was a chronicle of her nights with Patti, written not as confession, but as remembrance. Patti never spoke of it publicly. She canceled several performances that summer and retreated from interviews entirely. To those who asked, she would only say, "Some voices never fade even when the song ends." Whether or not the purple notebook truly held their story remains unknown. What endures is the echo of 2 artists bound by love's silence and the heavy cost of living too deeply in a world that seldom forgives tenderness. Millie Jackson, The Shaking Van, and the Missing Tape. In the summer of 1977, the humid air of Georgia was heavy with rhythm and electricity. Patti LaBelle, already a name synonymous with vocal brilliance, arrived to headline the Soul Sisters Unite event, a night celebrating women in rhythm and blues. That same stage also belonged to Millie Jackson, the audacious, sharp-tongued singer whose performances were a cocktail of comedy, sensuality, and raw truth. When Patti watched Millie belt out All the Way Lover, she was captivated. Millie's voice didn't just sing. It prowled, taunted, and seduced the audience with fearless honesty. Backstage, amid tangled cables and half-empty champagne bottles, the two women met for the first time. According to a sound engineer who was packing up equipment, their chemistry was instant laughter, teasing, and the kind of energy that made everyone else step back. By the end of the night, the tour van parked behind the theater remained idling long after the crowd had gone. Its curtains drawn, the faint sound of silk brushing against leather, and a hint of perfume in the air. Their connection was not built on tenderness or quiet affection like Patti's earlier friendships. With Millie, it was fire meeting fire, volatile, consuming, and impossible to control. Patti was disciplined, polished, the embodiment of elegance. Millie was chaos personified, unfiltered, and untamed. The stage crew would later recall how their dressing rooms were often side by side during the short tour that followed. Sometimes after rehearsals, Millie would sneak into Patti's room with a bottle of wine, and music would echo through the hallway, laughter followed by long stretches of silence. One sound technician said that during one late-night rehearsal, he caught a glimpse of them sitting together under dim lights, Patti resting her head on Millie's shoulder, both humming the same tune without words. It was a relationship that fed on intensity and secrecy, one that neither dared to define. But passion that burns that brightly can't escape destruction. In early 1978, Millie found herself at the center of a media scandal when a private recording and explicit audio meant for an unreleased album was accidentally leaked to a Christian ethics magazine. The tape contained sounds mistaken for intimacy, and within days, her reputation was in ruins. In an interview that same month, Ike Turner was asked about the controversy and famously quipped, "I ain't worried about Tina and no man. I'm worried about Millie. She got everyone looking at women different." His offhand remark poured gasoline on the fire, linking Millie's name with nearly every female performer she'd ever shared a stage with. Patti's management panicked. Her team advised her to distance herself immediately, fearing the industry's backlash would swallow them both. What followed was a silence more devastating than words. Patti stopped answering calls, canceled shared appearances, and instructed her assistants to erase Millie's name from upcoming tour materials. The day the scandal broke, Patti reportedly burned a red satin scarf that Millie had once given her, a flamboyant accessory she'd worn on stage only once. A recording assistant who worked in Patti's Philadelphia studio said she locked herself inside for 3 days, refusing calls or visitors. She was writing, but not songs he recalled. It was like she was exercising something. When she finally emerged, her eyes were swollen, her voice raw. The two women never performed together again, and for decades neither acknowledged the other publicly. Millie, ever defiant, continued to perform with biting humor, occasionally hinting at a lost love in her banter. In a 1985 radio interview, when asked whether she had ever fallen for another artist, she smiled and replied, "That question ain't on my track list, baby." 3 decades later, in 2007, the past resurfaced quietly. Millie was performing in New Orleans, her voice still thunderous, her charisma intact. Among the audience sat Patti LaBelle, dressed entirely in black, wearing no jewelry, no makeup, a figure almost unrecognizable in her simplicity. She stayed through only one song, "You Symphony," then rose, placed a hand on her heart, and walked out before the applause ended. A stagehand later confirmed she left without speaking to anyone, her eyes glistening under the hallway lights. Those who witnessed it said it felt less like closure and more like a prayer, a silent acknowledgement of something fierce and unforgettable. The van was long gone, the red scarf nothing but ash, but the memory lingered like smoke after a fire. The story of two women who loved too dangerously in a time that allowed neither to be free. Whitney Houston, the destroyed videotape, and the backstage embrace. The night of the 1993 Soul Train Awards was one of glitter, celebration, and exhaustion. Backstage, beneath the hot glare of spotlights and the nervous energy of 100 performers, Patti LaBelle stood near the wings waiting to present an award. She had been in this world for decades, a veteran of triumphs and tears, while Whitney Houston, radiant and untouchable, was still the reigning star of her generation. When Whitney appeared, her eyes shimmered with fatigue more than fame. The cameras followed her every move, but in a rare moment away from the stage, the younger singer faltered, trembling slightly as if the applause had grown too loud. Patti, maternal yet commanding, stepped forward and wrapped her arms around her from behind. A technician operating a handheld recorder captured those few seconds. Whitney standing motionless, tears sliding down her cheeks. Patti holding her tightly, whispering something no one could hear. The tape was reviewed that night, but executives ordered it destroyed, deeming it inappropriate for broadcast. What they erased wasn't scandalous. It was human. Later that evening, while most of the industry gathered at after-parties, Patti quietly slipped away from her own hotel suite and took the elevator to the 16th floor where Whitney was staying. A front desk attendant noted the time just past midnight and that she asked for no service calls or disturbances. The two women remained behind closed doors until late morning. No staff entered the room, though a housekeeper later confirmed the bed linens smelled faintly of jasmine, Patti's preferred fragrance in the early 90s. When Whitney failed to appear for a scheduled interview the next day, representatives from Sony Records arrived, knocking repeatedly before Patti emerged alone, hair undone, wearing a hotel robe that didn't belong to her. She declined to speak to anyone, requested a private car, and left without checking out. No statement followed, but the incident became quiet lore among hotel workers and industry insiders. The night, two voices of different eras found solace in silence. In the months after that awards ceremony, something in Whitney began to unravel. Colleagues noticed her laughter thinning, her focus fading during rehearsals. Security guards traveling with her tour described moments of volatility, smashed mirrors, sudden tears, long hours locked in dressing rooms. One of them mentioned she carried a small bottle of jasmine perfume, spraying it on her pillow before bed, only to scrub it away in the morning. Her personal nurse in 1994 told of sleepless nights, anxiety, and a growing dependence on prescription medication. Patti, though rarely seen with her again, kept a quiet watch. According to a former assistant, she would send anonymous care packages to Whitney's staff, herbal teas, handwritten notes, and religious books, signed only with a heart. To the public, she offered no comment, even when tabloids speculated about mentorship gone wrong. In truth, Patti understood something no article could capture, that fame could wound more deeply than failure. By 2005, Whitney's struggles had become front-page news. Rehab attempts, canceled shows, and erratic appearances overshadowed her brilliance. Yet behind the headlines, an anonymous financial sponsor was listed on one of her California treatment records, traced back to Patti LaBelle's private foundation. A representative from Sony later confirmed that an undisclosed donor had contributed to Whitney's recovery costs, though the identity was never publicly verified. For Patti, it wasn't charity, but a final act of care. She never sought acknowledgement. She simply carried guilt for a woman she once held when the world wasn't watching. In interviews from that period, when asked about addiction in the music industry, she would pause and say softly, "Some people sing to survive. Others sing because surviving is too hard." On February 11, 2012, Whitney Houston was found lifeless in her Beverly Hilton suite. The official cause, drowning, aided by a mix of narcotics and sedatives. A hotel maid later recounted that two pillows lay unevenly on the bed, one faintly scented with jasmine, a fragrance Patti had stopped wearing more than a decade earlier. Patti did not attend the televised funeral, though photographers captured her leaving a small Philadelphia church days later, holding a black leather journal against her chest. Those close to her said it contained the names of those she had loved and lost, written in her own looping cursive. Somewhere within those pages, they believed, was a single name written softer than the rest: Whitney. And for those who remember the music, the hug, and the silence that followed, that is all that ever needed to be said. 6 Hidden Loves, the unheard screams of Patti LaBelle. When the final curtain falls and the stage lights dim, what remains of a legend like Patti LaBelle is not just her music, but the echoes of the lives she touched and the loves she lost. Across decades, her story has carried 6 haunting names: Sarah Tina Turner, Gladys Knight, Phyllis Hyman, Millie Jackson, and Whitney Houston. Each woman entered her life in a different era under different circumstances, yet every connection followed the same quiet pattern: intensity, secrecy, and heartbreak. They were her sisters in song, her equals in talent, and her reflections in pain. Behind the sequins and the spotlights, Patti's heart became a sanctuary of memories she could never speak aloud, the unrecorded verses of a ballad that was never meant for radio. Sarah was the first note, the beginning of a melody that lingered long after silence fell. She represented innocence, the thrill of companionship in youth, and the ache of a friendship broken by time. Then came Tina Turner, a force of nature as fierce as thunder and as fragile as smoke. Their brief crossing left behind the ghost of a fragrance Patti could never bear again. Gladys Knight followed the prayerful confidant who vanished when judgment drew too near. With Phyllis Hyman, the song turned mournful lipstick on silk tears on sheet music and a diary that locked away the words they never dared to speak. Millie Jackson brought passion and danger, the kind of heat that leaves scars long after the fire dies. And finally, Whitney Houston, the youngest, the brightest, and perhaps the most tragic, whose fall from grace still echoes in the quiet of hotel corridors and the scent of jasmine that lingers in Patti's memory. Each of these women mirrored a different part of Patti's soul. Sarah gave her loyalty, Tina gave her courage, Gladys gave her faith, Phyllis gave her vulnerability, Millie gave her desire, and Whitney gave her grief. Together they formed an invisible choir, harmonizing the story of a woman who learned that love in its purest form often demands silence. Those who worked with Patti across the years say her rehearsals sometimes ended in tears, not from exhaustion, but from the weight of emotion she poured into every song. Her voice, soaring to impossible heights, carried a pain that felt lived in, earned, and eternal. When she sang of heartbreak, the audience heard art. Only she knew it was confession. The public saw triumph, glamour, and endurance. But in truth, Patti LaBelle's greatest performances were not on stage, they were in the restraint she maintained, the secrets she guarded, and the compassion she extended to those who fell before her. The music industry celebrated her resilience, yet few realized that behind her laughter lay the ghosts of 6 women who had shaped her, broken her, and ultimately defined her. Every photograph, every applause, every encore was another chapter of survival, written against the grain of heartbreak. In the end, Patti LaBelle's story is not about scandal, but sacrifice. It is about the cost of loving in a world that rewards restraint and punishes vulnerability. The 6 women who passed through her life became her unspoken lyrics, their fates woven into every high note she ever released into the air. Her true screams were never on stage. They lived inside her, pressed between melody and memory. For a woman whose art moved millions, the most powerful thing Patti ever did was not sing, it was keep her silence, holding within her the sound of 6 unforgettable souls. Patti LaBelle's story ends not with applause, but with questions that refuse to fade. Were these 6 women merely chapters of friendship or verses of love censored by time and fear? Her silence left room for wonder and for truth to be interpreted, not declared. What is certain is that Patti's voice carried the weight of every unspoken emotion, every hidden farewell. In the end, maybe the greatest legends are not defined by what they reveal, but by what they protect. This is Legends of Black Excellence, where history sings and mystery still breathes.